Warriors, come out to play. Hi guys, so before we get into this, I'll quickly say that there will be spoilers today. This is an old movie, at least in my opinion. I've kind of reached that point in my life now where I consider anything that's older than me to be old, okay? I was born in 1980, this movie came out in 79, therefore in my mind it is an old movie. So this is about gangs in New York, except do not be confused with the Martin Scorsese film of roughly the same name. There is no Leonardo DiCaprio in this film trying to woo Cameron Diaz whilst being dressed like Oliver Twist. This is about gangs in modern day New York, or at least 1979 modern day New York. We focus on a gang of 9 youths who are, they're called the Warriors, that's what they call themselves. And one day they are invited to a big meeting of all the gangs in New York, which is taking place in Brooklyn, which I'm not very good at New York geography, but I think that Brooklyn is quite far away from Coney Island. So they got to travel quite a bit for this meeting. And when they get there, they realise that the guy who's doing the meeting, Cyrus, he's got this proposal for all the gangs. He wants them to start working together instead of beating each other up. The idea is that maybe then, as a collective, they can control the streets and rule the roost over the cops, etc., etc. But this plan never comes to pass because during the meeting, somebody fires a gun from the crowd, which kills Cyrus, and all hell breaks loose. People start running this way and that. The cops suddenly turn up as well, which just adds to the chaos. And somebody shouts out that it was the Warriors who shot Cyrus. Completely false, but it sticks, this opinion, and suddenly the Warriors are blamed for ruining the whole thing. So the Warriors get the hell out of there, apart from one of them who gets killed straight away. But they've got to get back to Coney Island. The rest of the night, and the rest of the film actually, they're on the run, and all the gangs in New York are trying to get them out of revenge for killing this guy Cyrus, even though they didn't do it. So it's a kind of chase movie, this, through the black streets of New York. They've got to try and go from Brooklyn to Coney Island. It's a film which definitely has a kind of fantasy comic book feel to it, and I would have said that years ago, way before the director's cut version came out, and they put these little comic book inserts in as screen transitions, but I'll come back to that stuff later. You're not meant to look at this film and think to yourself that it's not really a proper reflection of real life New York or real life gangs. It is meant to be like a slightly different reality. It is very outlandish, and one of the main reasons for this is in the way that all the gangs in this film wear their own colours. So the Warriors, for example, they wear these brown jackets that leave their chests exposed. They're all very colour coordinated. They've got the Warriors written on the back, not in pen either, like proper embroidered colours. These jackets, they must have got them like custom made at a store and spent like hundreds of dollars on them. And all the gangs in New York in this film have done exactly the same thing. All the gangs have spent a lot of time doing their outfits out. It makes them sort of feel like sports teams almost. You definitely wouldn't get that in real life. I've never seen gangs going to that extent. Like, I've seen Hell's Angels going around in roughly the same wear, and I've seen kids occasionally walking around in the same coloured denims, but nothing on the scale of what you see in this film, which is how you know straight away that we're dealing with an exaggerated fantasy sort of film. Picking apart different things about this film as not being true to life, it is definitely not the right approach to it at all. And there are lots of questions you can ask of this as you're watching it, things that don't quite add up. But like I said, it's not that kind of film. It's not meant to be a realistic chase film in the same vein as, say, Judgment Night, where, you know, Emilio Estevez is being chased around by Dennis Leary and his goons. That is a very grounded, realistic thriller that absolutely is meant to be set in the real world. The Warriors is not. It's a slightly different version of the real world. I'll give you an example of a couple of questions I've asked myself during my many watches of this film over the years. So it occurred to me at one point, well, why don't the Warriors just get a taxi cab back from Brooklyn to Coney Island? Just jump in a cab and job done. But then I thought to myself, well, maybe in this world there are no taxi cabs. Maybe the gangs have become so dominant on the streets that cab drivers just gave it up long ago, and now the only way to get home is on the rail. Another question I asked myself was, well, given that all the other gangs in the city know very well that the Warriors are from Coney Island. Why don't all the gangs just go to Coney Island and wait for the Warriors to get home? Makes sense, right? But then I thought to myself, well, maybe the police in this world, maybe they tolerate gangs walking around in colours on their own turfs, but maybe the police don't like it when gangs cross into other turfs, because that will lead to violence and fighting and murder, etc., etc. So maybe that's why in this film a lot of gangs do go after the Warriors, but only whilst the Warriors are on their turf, because it constantly seems throughout this film that the Warriors are moving closer to home, getting into different scrapes with different gangs, but gangs very rarely follow the Warriors in this film. There are only 2 gangs who actually go to Coney Island, other than the Warriors. One of them is the Granary, I forget what they're called actually, the Granary Riffs or something like that. I probably got that wrong, but they're like the biggest gang in New York. They're one of the few gangs that I could believe would have the muscle and the firepower to maybe defy police expectation and actually go to Coney Island and try and confront the Warriors there. The other gang that goes to Coney Island are the Rogues, who are led by a very psychotic idiot leader, and I guess no further explanation is needed for why he would just be going all over the place when maybe he's not supposed to be. But in general, this film definitely has a very escapist fantasy sort of feel to it. Yeah, it's a film which has it's had a lot of thought behind it in terms of its world building, but it doesn't waste time explaining stuff to you. You've got to sort of puzzle that stuff out for yourself. Like, another way to have done this film would have been to waste a lot of the runtime having characters having conversations with each other, explaining all the stuff that I've just been theorising about, but that doesn't happen. You're just invited to watch this film and enjoy it for what it is, a good chase movie in the dark. And if you've got certain questions about the world and the characters in it, then that's stuff for you to ponder over in your own time after the movie, and just think about it in the days after you've watched the film, which I've done many, many times over the years after I've watched it myself, just because I've enjoyed it that much. The Warriors as characters are extremely likeable. Even the guy who dies almost straight away, I'd already grown to like him through what is probably a very small amount of scenes that he's in. And the same goes for the rest of them. This is not a terribly violent group of kids. This isn't the type of gang who walk around the streets looking to mug someone or throw a pool ball through a shop window just for fun. These kids, they just want to be part of something because they don't have a whole lot going on in their lives. They like having this shared friendship through being in a gang, but they're very much from a sort of Mr. Miyagi school of thinking, as in they've learned how to be good at fighting just for the purposes of defense rather than offense. You know, they just want to protect their turf, protect each other. That they're not really into the offense. And in this movie, you see a lot of what they're about. You know, because often when they get into confrontations, their first instinct is to try and at least run before they get into a fight. You don't find out anything about these characters, really. Like, there's no point in this movie where somebody says, "Oh man, I'm supposed to be opening the store at 7 a.m. tomorrow morning. I'm going to get my ass fired." There's no moment where somebody says, "Oh God, I promised Linda I'd be back by 11. She's going to be frigging mad at me." There's nothing like that. We find out nothing about these characters' day-to-day lives, but it's like the movie doesn't want you to get distracted by unnecessary possibilities. It just wants you to focus on the mechanics of the chase, on the here and now. It doesn't want you thinking about inconsequential things like whether Rembrandt's going to get sacked from his paper round or anything like that, if you see what I mean. There's a fascinating romance that builds up between the main character Swan and a character whose name I think is Mercy. I really hope I'm right about that. Mercy comes into the story about a third of the way through. I think she's an orphan because she starts this story hanging out with a gang who are called the Orphans, because I think they're from an orphanage. I could be wrong about that, although why else would they call themselves the Orphans? But this character Swan, even though he's a great fighter and a good leader of the Warriors when he's called up to do that, he's very damaged when it comes to women. You can tell that he's not met a very high class of woman throughout his short life. So when this girl Mercy comes along and shows an interest in him, he kind of pushes back against it. It's like, no, I just hate having anything to do with women because they're just not a great class of people, and I can tell that you're probably more along the lines of that. But Mercy she's actually a good person just dying to get out, because you can tell that she's the sort of girl who is basically almost a street urchin. She's hardly had anything going for her. Probably she's spent most of her life just getting by sort of offering herself up as a sex toy to like the members of the Orphans or whoever. And to begin with, she's probably only attracted to Swan because he's just a tough-looking guy who looks interesting. But once she realises that Swan's pushing back against her, it's like something she's not experienced before, and therefore she finds Swan even more interesting, and so she can't resist going after him more and more. And it gets to a point where she's almost chasing the warriors across New York with more intensity than the actual gangs. But I just love how this friendship / romance builds up, and the mechanics of it. Swan sort of gradually weakening towards Mercy as the film goes on, and Mercy just really giving it her all in terms of trying to win him over. And I think by the end of this movie, they've just about reached a point where he's going to give her a chance, and she's fully left wherever it was that she lives. I think if I try and picture what happens after this movie, I suspect that Swan will try and put her up somewhere, and they'll make a go of it. There's a fantastic scene on the train just as they're getting quite close to the end of their journey, where they're just sat exhausted, bloodied, dirtied, and this quartet of Silver Spoon kids get onto the train, and you couldn't get two groups who were such complete opposites than what you get here. You've got Swan and Mercy who are like down in the gutter, like dirt on them, and they just look like they've been through the ringer. And then you've got these kids who look like they've just walked out of the prom or something. And it's just complete opposites. And it's then that I sort of think to myself, well, in this world of the warriors, like there must be like a big sort of have and have nots, because I get the impression that in this world, because of the sheer amount of gang members, that probably it is a society where a lot of people are just trapped in like really low paid jobs. They just don't really have the opportunity to go anywhere in life, and it's all really depressing, and that's why they turn to gangs just to feel something. And certainly Swan and Mercy and all the people in the Warriors, they're part of that cycle. And then you've got sort of luckier people in society, and this is one of those weird moments where they're together briefly on this train, and the way that Swan and Mercy look at these characters, it's not in envy, it's sort of just plain exhaustion. Like, yeah, they've always known that this is just how life works, and they've got no feeling towards that anymore. You know, they've got no resentment. It's just kind of like, yeah, whatever, we're just going to sit here. But it's a powerful moment for me, and it's an example of how this film is very clever in giving you a lot of different things to focus on. It's not just about the fighting. This is not it's not a film that you're going to love because of its fighting. There's not actually a lot of fighting in it. There's like a few good fight scenes here and there, but we're not talking about the raid. You know, you're not going to remember it for that. If you're going to come out of this film a fan of it, I think you're going to appreciate several different aspects to it. And for me, the relationship between Swan and Mercy is actually, it's almost as fun to follow and get behind as the actual Warriors' bid for survival itself. The soundtrack of this film is absolutely awesome, especially the main theme that plays over the beginning when all the gangs are using the subway trains to ride to the conclave. It's just an amazing piece of music, and it fits this film like a glove. Check it out if you don't believe me. Just type in the Warriors theme 1979 on YouTube and see for yourself. I'm telling you, you haven't lived until you have played this music off your phone while you're riding a train into a big inner city hub on your way to work. It's just the perfect way to start the day. There are lots of scenes in and around train stations in this film, especially the Union Square station. There's one scene in particular that used to confuse the hell out of me when I was growing up. So there's a scene where the Fox character starts grappling with a police officer, and Fox gets kicked onto the tracks and just obliterated by an oncoming train. It's a really brutal scene. When I saw it for the first time, I was like, whoa, because in a scene like this halfway through the film, normally you expect the red shirt to be kicked onto the track, or blue shirt in this case, with it being a police officer. But the fact that it was one of our characters getting this horrible death completely out of the blue, it shook me a little bit. But the scene's confusing because you can't actually properly see which character it is being kicked onto the tracks. So originally this scene wasn't in the film. The Fox character was meant to go all the way to the end, but they decided to revise the story a little bit for various reasons. And this actor who played Fox, Tom Waits, David Waits, something like that, he was resistant to the changes halfway through production. So he stopped getting on with the director, and there was no communication there. And one of two things happened in the end. Either the actor was just sacked off the project before it was even finished, or he simply refused to come back to do his alternate scenes that he needed to do, including the one at the train station. So that's why it's basically entirely a stunt double doing that fight sequence, and they try and keep the actor's face out of the camera as much as they can. But it's confusing when you watch it, especially if you were like me back in the 90s, the days before the internet. You know, you couldn't just find out the reasons for certain scenes being the way that they were. Like one time, I actually started the film again and started paying close attention to all the faces of the warriors, trying to remember them, so that after the Union Square scene, I could then look at the faces of the warriors who were left, and by process of elimination, figure out which character it was who had died. And I think I figured it out in the end, but it was a tough slog, you know. But I still love the scene. If that scene is there by happy accident and it wasn't originally written that way, then it's a very happy accident indeed, because it's an absolutely brutal death, and definitely one that I remember from watching the film growing up. The police in this film are absolutely brutal. Like, it would be easy to write a film like this and think to yourself, well, I'll just leave the police mostly out of the story. You know, this is about gangs at the end of the day. We'll make all the police like Chief Wiggum's, just they don't want to do any work, etc., etc. But no, completely the opposite. The police are all over this film. They're like another gang, but the biggest gang of all, and they're tough. You know, I mean, I'd sort of expect that, I guess, given the fact that they've got Sonny Landham among their ranks, who would go on to play Billy in Predator. I mean, he's not going to take any shit from the Warriors. But yeah, the police, they're hard in this film. They are hard-boiled. Like, occasionally they might take a punch or roll down some steps, but they bounce straight back up. They're like the toughest people in this film. They are real tough cops. They remind me of the cops from a video game called Road Rash that I played in the early 90s. It was about illegal street racing, and you could press a button to kick out at the thugs on the other bikes to try and knock them off. But if the police rode up, you couldn't unseat the police. They could not be removed from their bikes. It was just a thing of the programming. It hadn't been put in there. But because fans of the game sort of outcried about this, once they released Road Rash 2, they made it so that you could unseat the cops. But yeah, the cops from Road Rash 1 are basically the cops from the Warriors. They're just really tough, and they get back up extremely quickly. So before I move towards wrapping this review up, there are two side characters I really want to mention who I really love in this. So firstly, Luther, the main villain, who's sort of the leader of the rogues, although given that he gets on the phone and talks to some other guy back at HQ, it could be that there's another leader of the rogues who's not actually in the film. I'm not sure about that, but certainly on the night of the big meeting in Brooklyn, Luther is the de facto leader. But I just love the way that this character is played by an actor called David something Kelly, something like that. But it's a fantastic performance. He doesn't get that many scenes, but you really believe that the psychotic nature of this guy. He's only a little guy, but wow, he's got such an energy on the screen. The scene where he does call back home, it's a brilliant scene, because it's at this little confectionery stand, and Luther goes to use the phone, and his teammates, at the want of a better word, they go to where all the chocolate is and start stealing chocolate, and this girl's just watching. She doesn't want to get involved. But when Luther comes off the phone, the girl finally speaks up and says, "Aren't you all going to pay for that?" And Luther just turns around and goes, "For what?" Like, oh no, I've got the line wrong. She says something like, "What about the money you owe?" And then he says, "For what?" And there's two things here. Either one, he's fully aware of all the chocolate that's been stolen and he's just being an arsehole. Or number two, he's got no idea that his mates have just taken the chocolate, so his reaction is of genuine surprise. For what? You know, and if it's the latter, it's absolutely hilarious. The other character I wanted to mention is the leader of the Baseball Furies, just because of how he looks. Like, his face paint and his mouth, his smile that he's got, it's just weird. It's like Alice Cooper could have played this role if Cooper was, you know, somebody who could do a lot of running. He could have played this role, because just the look about him, it's absolutely fantastic. There's a shot where the Warriors think they've got away from the Furies, and then they just come over the horizon. You just see this like colourful head pop up above the concrete. It's absolutely awesome. And then the leader of the Baseball Furies, once the fighting starts, he does this little thing with his baseball bat where he's like, spinning it around, like being all fancy, like that ninja who tries to take on Indiana Jones with the swords and gets shot. But in this instance, in the Warriors, Ajax just takes him out. It's one of my favourite moments of the film as well. So I'll quickly show you the version of the film that I've got for this. Here is my Blu-ray copy of The Warriors. It is the ultimate director's cut, but there aren't really any additional scenes in it. What there are these comic inserts. They're like screen transitions. They only last a few seconds, and they're sort of in the movie periodically. They sort of act like chapter breaks, I guess. I don't mind them. Some of them are actually quite colourful and did make me want to possibly check out some of the Warriors comics, but the trouble is there's one of these little inserts that is a bit of a problem for me personally, because, okay, it's the scene where the Warriors are just coming out of Union Square and they meet the Baseball Furies. Now, in the original theatrical cut, the characters would literally turn around and the Furies would all be spaced out around the street, and it would be a real surprise moment, a very, very creepy moment. But that's kind of ruined with these comic inserts, because the first time we learn about the fact that the Furies are here is via this comic strip picture, and it's just not quite the same. But apart from that one moment, all the other little comic inserts that happen, I guess I don't mind them, and purely because the picture quality of the director's cut is probably way ahead of what the theatrical cut used to be, then certainly I would absolutely prefer this version overall. Not that I've got a choice, because the theatrical version is not included on the disc. This front cover, it looks quite good, doesn't it? But I prefer the old VHS cover that just had like 1,000 thugs from Cyrus's meeting on there. It was a mind-blowing picture. It really was. And that was how I discovered the movie originally, because I was in a video store and I was just perusing the shelves and I spotted this amazing cover with like 1,000 thugs on it, and I thought to myself, ooh, what's that? And that's how I discovered the movie. I persuaded my dad to let me rent it. Would I have still rented the movie if I'd have seen that back in the day? I'm not sure. There are a number of features on the disc, mainly a documentary that's about an hour long. It's split into 4 quadrants, but if you just play them all back to back, it adds up to about an hour. It's quite in-depth. It's pretty damn good, and you get a trailer with it. That's it. There's no commentary, sadly, although I did listen to a very good commentary on somebody's YouTube channel the other week. Ravens Productions is the channel. Very good channel for movie talk and stuff. And yeah, the guy who does that channel did a very, very good commentary of this film. But honestly, despite one or two little misgivings I have about certain aspects of this Blu-ray, certainly I can see it being one of my prized possessions of my collection going forward. Right, let's get to the bag of terror and find out what sort of score I'm going to give this film. We've got a lot in here today. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Is there anything else? Yes, there is. 5 bloody axes out of 5. It's got masterpiece status. Not often I do this on the channel. 5 out of 5. The Warriors is a wonderful film. It's definitely one of my most favourite films of all time. It is an absolute classic. It is amazing. You've got to check it out if you haven't yet seen it. Right, I'll be back soon with another review. Until next time, don't go bopping any heads. Bye-bye.